I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com.
So we've spoken before, Eamon, about how a Russian network was being used by gangs across Europe and possibly across the world to launder huge amounts of money. And this sort of plot, this conspiracy was basically busted by the NCA. And again, our own homegrown cartel, the Kinahans, were at the centre of it. But there was further updates this week, really, as the NCA, kind of who've been described as Britain's FBI, spoke about how the money launderers had even bought a section of a bank, and they gave further details about the Irish operation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a multi-billion dollar, euro, rubles, whatever, all the currencies are involved. And basically, I suppose the NCA, from their point of view, what was new was that it was showing how directly and indirectly this money laundering network was being used by sanctioned individuals such as the Kinahans, but also people who are linked to the Russian regime and to official banks were using this to avoid sanctions. And there's like a cryptocurrency exchange that has moved $86 billion. Wow. 6 billion of that after it was actually sanctioned. And the idea that they bought a bank in Kyrgyzstan was new as well. So, I mean, last year we did do a piece about this. You wrote about it and I both wrote about it. Last December, the NCA came out, and at that point, there was something like 84 people had been arrested, and they'd seized 20 million in cash taken directly from couriers. That's 20 million sterling. And since then, there's been about another 45 people arrested, and they found another 5 million, which doesn't sound much. But I suppose what they were trying to do was they were trying to discourage people, getting involved in the actual couriering network. So you're talking about these are people who go around with bags of money, 300 grand. They get 0.5%. They get 0.05%, so they get less than 0.5% of what they're carrying. So they might make 1,500 quid on a 300 grand bag of money, but they're facing then 6 and 7 years in prison when they get caught. So this is one of the reasons why they were coming out and telling the world about it. It was all this kind of off the record
let's go back to
briefing that we got.
No, let's go back to say how it works, right? So the Kinahans, who are name checked and specifically mentioned, they're not. It's not us throwing them in. But, for example, there's a lot of drugs sold in Dublin. Say they get up to this €300,000, which they seem to work on €300,000 sums. So somebody sells a load of cocaine, they collect 300 grand in cash, and then they probably have to pay the Kinahan somewhere. And so they hire this Russian network. And what does the Russian network do for them?
Well, basically, the courier will turn up and collect your money and take it out of the country. Yeah, or do whatever they do, because we do know that there's other ways of moving money, and then you'll get your money back in cryptocurrency. Yeah, so you can ship that through a bank. Like this particular group was being run out of Moscow, Dubai, and London. Yeah, so I mean it's very easy then to move your money into a bank in Dubai. No questions asked.
So you give the 300 grand to them, and then somebody of the Kinahan network goes into a bank in Dubai basically and gets presumably something like 270,000 or whatever it is.
Well, it seems to be good value. They were talking about between 6 and 9%, which is a very, very low. I mean, the couriers themselves were getting effectively 1,000 quid or 2 grand for moving money and taking a lot of the physical risk. And then I suppose the overall network, and it was run between these two kind of separate companies. There was.
One of them was called Smart.
Yeah, Smart's the easy one to remember. Yeah.
The other one, it was TGR.
Smart and TGR groups. And at one point, there was one of them, of course, you remember Katrina Zandova, and she was this very good-looking blonde, and she was described as being a socialite. Yeah, and she was very much the head of this operation. But the NCA were actually linking the people of both TGR and Smart. They were in direct contact with some of these couriers. Yeah, and actually directing these guys to get in your van and head off somewhere to Doncaster or Dublin or Liverpool or wherever it was. And some of the guys they were able to track, having been in 28 different towns in less than a year. And it was only only really a snapshot of the operation, what they got. So, I mean, the 25 million that's been seized is literally just a snapshot of something that is much, much larger.
Yeah, and of course, Ekaterina, like she was, I suppose she's, a glamorous socialite was what she was described as, but she was like an influencer in Russia and like quite famous. I mean, I don't know, I'm not going to compare her to somebody here because that'd be hyper libelous, but she was one of these really well-known people on social media and always photographed in hotels and, doing interviews in magazines. But so they were the people behind it. Now the NCA have said, of course, that it's not just the criminal network that they're linking it to the Russian regime. Obviously that.
Yeah, and one of the things they mentioned last week was that in the summer of 2023, so you had individuals associated with the Russian intelligence services who were trying to use the smart group to provide funding to people based in the UK and Europe. And this included a group of Bulgarian nationals. There was a man called Orlan Rusev, who've since been convicted of spying operations in Europe on behalf of Russia. So there was a direct link there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's what they always call it. They call it basically, it's a way to fund sort of black market activities, I suppose. And it's an old thing that even the KGB did back in the communist era, where they have to pay these guys, they have to pay agents, they have to pay all of these people in the West, and they can't just transfer money into West banks without raising suspicion. So they get involved in criminality as a way to fund these things. And then obviously, this money is coming through Russia, and because they're facilitating their regime, there's obviously questions aren't going to be asked. Now, like while the Kinahans are mentioned, like we have very, very specific examples given by the NCA of money movements within Ireland, and that was part of their whole press release.
Yeah, well, some of it, it's come from our own research, and then some of it, I think, as well. Robin Chiller, our colleague in the Irish Independent, did a good piece last week, going into more about it. But for certainly, we previously wrote about a Lithuanian national called Igor Logsanov, and he was under surveillance when he arrived in Ireland. This is in July 2023. And at one point, he was caught with 57 grand at an apartment in Stepaside. Now, keep in mind that this is all money you're talking about being directed by companies linked to the Russian intelligence services. But the amount of money that they think that's been part of this Russian money laundering network being seized by the guards is now up to 2 million. So you would have had, for instance, this year there was more than 340,000 was taken from a man and a woman in Dublin Airport. Now some of these are before the court, so we won't get into too much details. The Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau seized another 400,000 after operations in Dublin and Leitrim. And there was another in West Dublin, another case where a vehicle was intercepted and over 600,000 in cash was taken. So you've about 7 people are before the courts over some of these operations. You had another one in April 2024. It was 500,000 seized in Dublin's Temple Bar area. So, and this is of somebody who had like a suitcase packed with money, and it was all vacuum packed and in bundles ready to go. I mean, this is a professional operation, and that this person had travelled into Ireland for a day just simply to fly in, fly out, get the cash. So this is the level you're talking at. It's not, these couriers are busy. They're not like making occasional calls. They're here on a regular, probably on a daily basis. So that's the kind of level of sort of cash movement that's going on.
And interestingly, as well, as part of this whole all this information coming out is, I suppose, the emergence of cryptocurrency, not just to launder money between countries, but also to directly pay the South American cartels, which is mentioned. Now, sometimes me and Nicola have tried to talk about cryptocurrency, Eamon, and we haven't got very far because...
Well, I might be able to move it on one line, but I won't be able to go too far either.
But, like, obviously cryptocurrency, and we've heard this and written about this before, how the Kinahans have tried to convert a lot of their assets into cryptocurrency. But because obviously it's harder to trace, and you can see how this is the future of money laundering in operation as we speak by this network.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, like people are under this misapprehension that cryptocurrency is untraceable, and the whole point of cryptocurrency is the fact that it's based on I suppose, software called blockchain, which is the whole point of that is that it is traceable.
Yeah.
So the idea is that, but you can own your tokens or whatever anonymously.
Yeah.
But like they're very traceable. So if cryptocurrency is in one jurisdiction and then arrives in another jurisdiction, that is traceable. So the likes of the NCA can see those money flows.
Yeah.
They can see if there's billions going in cryptocurrency into, a small South American country or even a big South American country. So they have an idea of which direction the money is going and where it's coming from. The whole point, I suppose, part of this was as well that this bank, the Keramet Bank in Kyrgyzstan, that was part of a group that they came up with the A7 cryptocurrency, which was a ruble-based kind of, I suppose, cryptocurrency exchange. And the whole idea then it was to make it easier for oligarchs and sanctioned individuals to move the money. Then the A7 itself and the exchange it was sold on was also sanctioned. But even then, the techies involved in that were able to, like what's described as breaking down the wallets, and we were able to remove some of the original crypto tokens, and put them into new exchanges. So they were still able to beat some of the sanctions.
Yeah.
And I mentioned already, it was 86 billion had been moved, and even 6 billion of that was after the sanctions had come through. So obviously there's pressure on to move the money, but then again, I suppose, why would you leave it there? But again, it's just the sheer scale of it, and the idea that you're buying a bank, and this bank, Keramet, then was dealing with a Russian state-owned bank as well called PSB, which is the initials. I won't try and pronounce it.
Yeah.
And they were facilitating payments for them, which was again a way to get around. So indirectly, you can make the argument that people buying your Friday night bag of cocaine in any part of Ireland are indirectly funding the Russian war effort in Ukraine. I mean, to put yet another guilt trip on you, well as, you're buying bullets for gangsters in Ireland, but you're also buying Shahed drones, and you're buying, the Russian versions of cruise missiles to kill people in Ukraine.
I mean, you can see in organised crime at some level, the movement of money becomes just as important as the movement of drugs, if not more important. And it's a huge, problem, I suppose, for if you become a wealthy enough drug dealer to be able to disguise and move around your assets.
I think it's a third of the business. I mean, like acquiring the drugs and selling them takes up 2/3 of your effort, and that's that final third of moving the money and leaking that money or getting that money back into some kind of legitimate business is what separates the likes of the Kinahans from other people. It's what separates, the really serious, the serious criminals from the successfully, serious criminals. So, you mean, you can all be selling the same amount of cocaine, but some people have nothing to show for it, whereas others have managed to, move their assets to places where they're never going to be found by the Criminal Assets Bureau. No. But to do that, it takes a bit of knowledge, takes a bit of know-how, it takes the ability to network, the same as any other kind of business or commodity dealer. If you know the right bankers, you can finance your deal a bit quicker at a better interest rate. If you don't, it's a huge opportunity cost for drug dealers and any kind of criminals if they can't do that efficiently. And it's something that the likes of the NCA and the Criminal Assets Bureau and the Guards have long recognised, that going after the money trail, going after the laundering is just as effective as, and probably arguably more effective than going after the supply of the drugs in the first place and trying to stop, a wave of shipments coming in. If it gets to the point where it's impossible to convert the fruits of selling cocaine, nobody's going to sell it. So it's a very effective way at, adding to the costs, adding to the difficulty, putting another layer, like between it being a successful criminal and just being another runner in the race.
And of course, you see, they're Europol and the most recent sort of publications about the sort of the bigger threats faced by organised crime they keep warning that organised crime is evolving. I think in the most recent one, the most recent security and trafficking threats, really, their most recent document, they say it benefits from advanced technologies, is active across multiple jurisdictions. But it also says how these sort of state players are increasingly becoming involved. States like Russia, where, they're part of this these sort of bad actors, as how they describe it, are increasingly a threat because they're networking with these criminal groups.
Yeah, and it's, I think this isn't my phrase, someone else came up with it, but there is an arms race between the authorities and criminal gangs, organised criminal gangs at this stage, in one trying to stay ahead of the other in terms of hiding their money, the way they move the money and how they pay for things. And like we've seen with the Kinahan Cartel, I mean, they come up with various different ways over the years in how they actually launder their money. So, I mean, using this Russian network, it was just one of a couple of different threads that they would have followed over the years. Like we saw in the Criminal Assets Bureau case against Sam O'Sullivan, Kieran O'Sullivan, who is, would have been, we always described him as Christy Kinnan's posh boy protege. He's from South County Dublin. And they went after him and a certain amount of money and gold, I think, was involved in that. But they were really targeting a Chinese group at the time. And what was happening was that basically a local drug dealer or someone acting for an organised crime gang in Ireland could go with their bag of money, and there was a particular Asian restaurant in Dublin at the time that this particular network were using, and arriving with their bag of money, hand it over the counter, and that money would go to wherever you needed to go in the world. Obviously, physically wouldn't move. Yeah, but that money could then be withdrawn, by and that was the system they were using. It's like we've heard that the system of halawa. Yeah, that has been used before. It's an ancient way of moving money between, I suppose, different countries, and it's been around since the Middle Ages. That you go to a trusted person and you give them your money, you get your receipt, and you go to the next kingdom or the next jurisdiction or whatever, and you hand the note over, and you get the same money back minus a fee. Yeah, and it's all versions of that. And we heard there was other case about the Daigou system, with another Chinese system where they were selling money to get luxury goods.
Yeah, they basically don't have to move that cash before the person receives it, so they can hold on to that cash till a better time. But it works on this kind of, funnily enough, like a lot of criminality works on this kind of honour system, where the two people in different countries trust that even if the money isn't paid over straight away, it will be paid over. And just like a lot of the drug dealing goes on credit, which is always a surprising thing.
That was funny enough, the slightly off track, the piece about Raffaele Imperiali we did last week. The prosecutor said one of the things that strengthened him as a state witness is the fact that he had a reputation in the underworld for being a man of his word. Who kept his promises. And that, if you were doing a drug deal with him, everything was guaranteed to happen as it should.
And which was always said about Christy Kinahan, that the reason that one of the reasons he rose so high was that he always paid his debts to the South American cartels, whether drugs were seized which often happens. There's a breakdown at that point, but he was so reliable that they were happy to exclusively work for him.
And that was one of the things that I think distinguished the Kinahans from other Irish groups, maybe apart from George the Penguin Mitchell. But like back in 2010 during Operation Shovel, this idea that the Kinahans' illegal business, that money laundering was as big a part of it as the drug dealing. Yeah. And that was seen as the key. And we've heard, we've done various stories about, the guys who are owed 100 grand here and, 200 grand there for doing, the business of the Kinahans were told, leave the money with us and we'll launder it for you and we'll invest it for you. Yeah. And, that was part of their strength, I suppose, as well.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, we'll come back to it again. I mean, there's some of those court cases may come to fruition, and they're always interesting. And again, the idea that there's just these wads and wads of cash being seized all the time.
I think wad, it doesn't do it justice. No. A wad is something you might be able to fit into your pocket. I think you're talking about container loads, truck container loads.
Incredible.
Of cash.
Just incredible. Okay, thanks, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Niall.